All right, so today we're diving into property inheritance in South Africa, and specifically for you, we've got a whole bunch of resources here, articles, legal guides, all because you want to know how to get your late father's house into your name. You're thinking maybe you can kind of skip the deeds office. But from what I'm seeing, it looks like there might be some roadblocks. One thing that really stood out to me was this Master of the High Court. Sounds kind of like a fantasy novel, doesn't it? But luckily, we have an expert here to guide us through it all. Welcome to the deep dive.
Thanks for having me. Happy to break it all down.
Okay, so first things first. Can we actually bypass the deeds office or are we stuck with paperwork?
Well, unfortunately, the deeds office is non-negotiable.
Mm.
Here in South Africa, property transfers are really strictly regulated, and the deeds office makes sure everything is done properly.
Okay, so no shortcuts there. But what about this master of the high court? What's their role in all this?
Well, that's where things get a little interesting. When someone passes away, their assets are basically frozen. No one can touch them until an executor is appointed to manage the estate. And the master of the high court is the one who appoints that executor.
So they're kind of like overseeing the whole process, making sure it's all above board.
Exactly.
Yeah,
They're the referee, making sure everything is legal and fair when the estate is distributed.
that makes sense. But wait, if I'm the executor, does that mean I own the property?
Not quite. Being the executor is more like being a caretaker. You're responsible for making sure everything is done legally and according to the deceased's wishes. You're managing the estate, not automatically inheriting it.
Ah, so it's a responsibility, not a free ticket to ownership. But in this case, my father never actually formally transferred the house into his own name. Does that mean I'm out of luck?
Not at all. Even though the property wasn't formally transferred, you can still inherit it. You'll just need to go through the proper channels in the deceased estate process.
Okay, so break it down for me. What are the steps involved in this deceased estate process? Where do I even begin?
First things first, you need to report your father's death to the master of the high court within 14 days. They kickstart the whole process. Then they will appoint an executor who will open a separate bank account for the estate to handle any outstanding debts your father might have had.
So it's not just about handing over the assets, it's about settling any outstanding matters first.
Exactly. You got to tie up any loose ends before you can distribute the inheritance. Now, once those debts are taken care of, the remaining assets, including the house, can be distributed to the heirs. That's where you come in.
Okay, so let's say the debts are settled and I'm ready to inherit the house. What happens next? Do I just get the keys?
Not so fast. To legally transfer the property into your name, you'll need a conveyancer. They're the legal experts who handle property transfers.
Okay, a new player in the game. What exactly does a conveyancer do?
Think of them as the legal architect of the property transfer. They'll draw up all the necessary documents, submit them to the deeds registry, and make sure everything is legal and watertight.
So they're taking care of all the legal heavy lifting?
Precisely. They make sure that the transfer is legit and recorded correctly with the deeds office. It's a really crucial step in becoming the legal owner of the property.
Okay, that's starting to make more sense. But now I'm wondering about the costs. How much will all this cost? Is there a fee for everything?
That's a great question. Conveyancing fees are based on the property value, but for an RDP house, it'll probably be around R7,000 to R8,000.
Okay, that's good to know. But are there any other costs?
Well, here's some good news. You won't have to pay transfer duty. Since you're inheriting the property, there's no tax on this transfer.
Oh, that's a relief. Every little bit helps. Realistically, though, how long will this whole process take? Am I looking at weeks, months, years?
Well, that's where things get a little tricky. The deeds office has been dealing with some pretty big backlogs. So the process could take anywhere from 6 months to a year, sometimes even longer.
Ah, the joys of bureaucracy. So it's not exactly a quick fix, but at least I'm starting to understand what to expect.
Absolutely. And to help you navigate this, we've got some contact info for you. The Master of the High Court can give guidance on deceased estates, and the Deeds Registry can answer any questions about the transfer process.
That's great. It's like a roadmap for this whole journey. You also mentioned an organization called the Black Sash. What do they do?
Oh, the Black Sash is fantastic. They offer free paralegal advice, which would be really helpful if you have any questions or need any assistance. They'll make sure you understand your rights and help you stay on track.
This is all so helpful. I'm feeling a lot more prepared to tackle this, and I hope you are too. It might seem like a mountain of paperwork, but with the right info and resources, it's definitely manageable. Okay, so we've covered the deeds office, the master of the high court, even the conveyancing process. It's a lot to take in, but I think we've laid a solid foundation. Now, I'm curious about something you mentioned earlier about my father never formally transferring the house into his name. I know this is something a lot of South Africans struggle with, especially with older properties.
You've hit on a really important point.
Mhm.
South Africa has a complicated history with land ownership, especially in townships and rural areas. This means that property ownership might not always be officially documented.
So how does that affect someone trying to inherit a property? Is it even possible to gain legal ownership if the original owner is gone?
Well, luckily, South African law has ways to deal with this. There are legal processes and programs designed to help people secure their property rights, even if the paperwork isn't perfect. One of those is called prescriptive acquisition.
Prescriptive acquisition. Sounds kind of intimidating. What is that?
It's actually a fairly simple concept. Imagine you live in a house for 30 years, taking care of it, making it your home. Even if you don't have the initial paperwork, the law recognizes that you've established a claim to the property. That's the idea behind prescriptive acquisition.
So it's kind of like squatters' rights, but with a legal framework?
In a way, yes. It recognizes that long-term occupation can create legitimate property rights.
That's fascinating. It sounds like South African law is trying to find a balance between formal procedures and the realities of informal land ownership.
Exactly. It's all about making sure people have a fair chance to secure their property rights, no matter what the circumstances are.
That's really important, especially in a country with a complex history of land ownership like South Africa. It shows that the legal system needs to be adaptable to different social contexts.
Absolutely. And it's so important for individuals to understand these legal options so they can protect themselves.
So in my case, if my father lived in the house for a long time, even without formal ownership, could I potentially claim ownership through this prescriptive acquisition?
It's definitely something to consider. Of course, each case is different, and details would need to be looked at by a legal professional.
That makes sense. This is where those organizations like the Black Sash are so important. They can help guide people who might not be familiar with these legal details.
Absolutely. Free legal advice can be so helpful in these situations.
Okay, so we've talked about the steps involved in this prescriptive acquisition thing and even the cost, but let's go back to those potential delays at the deeds office. You mentioned backlogs, and I've heard those can be a real nightmare. What's causing these delays, and is there anything that can be done to speed things up?
So the deeds office plays a really important role in keeping those property records accurate here in South Africa. They register transactions, issue title deeds, and keep everything organized. But the system relies a lot on manual processes and paper documentation, which can be really time-consuming and prone to errors.
So it's like trying to run a 21st century system on outdated infrastructure. No wonder there are delays.
Exactly. And that creates these bottlenecks and inefficiencies that impact everyone involved in property transactions. The deeds office is understaffed, under-resourced, and struggling with old technology.
So it's not like they're dragging their feet on purpose. It's more like systemic issues.
Precisely. These are complex issues that require a lot of investment and political will to solve.
It sounds like a complete overhaul is needed, not just new computers, but a complete change in how the system works.
Absolutely. It's about making processes smoother, investing in training and technology, and ultimately creating a system that truly serves the public.
This brings up a much bigger question about technology and how it can be used to modernize these government services in South Africa. The deeds office is just one example of a system that could benefit from going digital.
Definitely. There's so much potential for technology to improve service delivery, reduce corruption, and make info more accessible to people.
It's an area where South Africa could make huge progress towards creating a more efficient and fair society.
Absolutely. It's an exciting opportunity.
Okay, so we've talked about the delays and the need for modernization, but let's focus back in on the conveyancing process. You mentioned that a conveyancer is needed to handle the legal side of things. What exactly do they do, and why are they so important?
Conveyancers are the legal specialists when it comes to property transfers in South Africa. They're like the go-betweens for the buyer, the seller, and the deeds office. They make sure the transfer of ownership is legal, valid, and recorded accurately.
So they're not just filling out forms, they're the legal guardians of the whole thing.
Exactly. They draft and review all the necessary legal documents, like the deed of transfer, mortgage bonds, and any other agreements. They also do a lot of research verifying the property's title to ensure there are no hidden issues that could cause problems with the transfer.
So they do their homework. It sounds like a job that requires a lot of expertise and attention to detail.
Definitely. Conveyancers have to go through rigorous training and must be registered with the Legal Practice Council to work here in South Africa. Their role is crucial in protecting everyone's interest in these transactions.
That makes sense. But with so many conveyancers out there, how do I choose the right one? What should I be looking for?
Choosing the right conveyancer can make a huge difference. You want someone you can trust and who'll keep you informed.
So what are your top tips? What should I be asking or looking out for?
First, look for experience. You want someone who knows deceased estates well.
So specialization matters.
Exactly. Different property transactions have their own legal quirks, so you want a conveyancer who knows the ropes.
Okay, experience is key. What else?
Second, check their credentials and their reputation. Make sure they are registered with the Legal Practice Council and have a proven track record. Ask for references or read reviews online. It's always a good idea to do your research.
Right, don't just go with the first person you find. Due diligence is important.
And finally, pay attention to their communication style. You'll be working closely with them, so make sure they communicate clearly, respond to your questions quickly, and keep you updated.
So good communication is essential.
Absolutely. A good conveyancer will be your advocate and guide throughout this whole process and make sure you're protected.
This is all incredibly helpful. Thank you for breaking down this whole property inheritance thing in South Africa. It's a lot to take in, but I'm feeling a lot more confident about tackling it. Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with a question. Could there be alternative solutions for situations where formal property ownership is missing in South Africa? What happens to families and communities when these legal frameworks aren't in place? We'll explore those questions further in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned. And as always, if you have any questions or want to explore other topics, just let us know. Now let's get into the specifics of your situation. You mentioned your father's house in Mitchell's Plain was part of a municipal housing scheme. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. Municipal housing schemes were pretty common in South Africa, particularly during apartheid. They were meant to provide housing for lower-income families. But often the initial allocation of a house didn't automatically come with full legal ownership. It's a really interesting part of South African history, and it might be key to understanding your situation.
This is where it gets even more interesting, isn't it? How might these schemes have affected the inheritance process?
Well, the details of each scheme are different, but often residents had the right to occupy the property but didn't have the full title deeds. Sometimes this was deliberate as a way to control where people lived during apartheid.
Wow. That's a stark reminder of how housing policies were used as a tool of oppression. So if my father didn't have full ownership, does that mean I can't inherit the property at all?
Not necessarily. It really depends on the specific rules of the housing scheme and any laws that have been made since then that could affect those rules.
It sounds like a thorough legal assessment is really important here.
Absolutely. A conveyancer who specializes in property law can look at the documents, research the history of the housing scheme, and advise you on your legal options.
It might also be worth reaching out to the municipality to see what records they have.
That's a great idea. They might have documentation or information that could clarify the ownership history of the property and any relevant legal provisions.
This deep dive is really showing how important it is to not just know the law, but also understand the history and the social context.
Exactly. It's like putting together a puzzle with legal, historical, and social pieces to find the best way forward.
This is making me think about the emotional side of things. Inheriting a property isn't just about the legal stuff. It's often tied to emotional legacies, family histories, and a sense of place.
You're absolutely right. It's about continuing a part of someone's life and their story. This house represents a connection to your father, to your family's past. It's much more than just a building.
Exactly. And understanding that emotional aspect can help you navigate the legal stuff with more purpose and resilience. But I can't help but think about the impact these inheritance challenges have on families and communities, especially where formal property ownership isn't clear.
That's a crucial point. When property rights are uncertain, it can cause tension within families and even slow down economic growth. Secure property rights are essential for people to invest in their homes and communities get access to credit and build a stable future.
So this deep dive is about so much more than just one person's inheritance. It's about the foundations of a fair society.
Absolutely. It's about ensuring everyone has the chance to experience the security and stability that comes with owning property.
Well, this has been a really fascinating conversation. We've explored the ins and outs of property inheritance in South Africa, uncovered some hidden historical issues, and considered some really important social questions.
It's been great to share this with you. Hopefully you're feeling more informed and ready to take this on.
I am. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are experts, organizations, and communities ready to support you every step of the way. We'll continue this deep dive in the next episode, where we'll explore potential alternative solutions and the broader implications of property ownership in South Africa. Stay tuned.
Introducing A to Z POS, your ultimate point of sale solution. Say goodbye to the hassle of traditional POS systems and embrace the future with A to Z POS. Our cutting-edge, cloud-based solution offers a seamless, secure, and efficient way to manage your business. Enjoy the benefits of real-time inventory management, quick and easy transactions, and increased customer satisfaction. With A to Z POS, your data is protected in the cloud, ensuring your business is always secure and compliant. Experience the freedom of managing your business from anywhere, on any device. A to Z POS, streamline your operations, boost your profits, and take your business to the next level.
Welcome back to our deep dive on property inheritance here in South Africa. Before the break, we were talking about these municipal housing schemes and how they could impact inheriting your father's house. It's a fascinating topic and so connected to our history here.
It is. And understanding that historical context is really important because it affects you directly today.
Okay.
We were talking about how those schemes, especially the ones during apartheid, often didn't give people full ownership rights.
Right. In some cases, it was like a lease.
Mm.
And it was often deliberate, a way to control where people lived. It's a reminder of how these policies were used to segregate and disenfranchise Black South Africans. Makes you realize that owning property isn't just about the building itself, it's about power. Absolutely. And the effects of those policies still impact people today, especially when it comes to inheriting property.
So let's say my dad lived in the house for years, paid his rent, considered it home, but never actually had those title deeds. Does that mean I can't inherit it?
Not necessarily. It's not a simple yes or no. South African law has changed to try to address these injustices from the past. There are legal options for you.
That's good to hear. So where do I even begin? What are my options?
Well, first, gather as much info as you can. Do you have any documents for the house, like lease agreements, receipts, or letters from the municipality?
I'll have to go through my dad's papers. I'm sure I can find something. What should I be looking for?
Anything that explains the rules of the housing scheme and his agreement? Like, was there anything about a way to become the owner after a certain time? Or did the municipality offer any programs to change from leasehold to freehold titles?
Good point. I'll watch out for that. What if those documents are gone or don't give clear answers? What then?
Well, like we talked about, reaching out to the municipality is important. They should have records of the housing scheme and your father's occupancy. Those records might have really important information about whether he legally owned the property.
It's like a treasure hunt, putting together the history of the house and my dad's legal situation.
Exactly. And you don't have to do this alone. There are experts who can help you along the way.
Speaking of experts, you said a conveyancer could help here. Why is that?
Conveyancers are the legal experts when it comes to property transfers in South Africa. They know all the laws inside and out and can help with the complexity of these old housing schemes.
So they're not just for regular property sales. They can handle these unusual situations too.
Absolutely. A conveyancer who specializes in property law can analyze the documents, do research on the housing scheme, and tell you what your legal options are.
It's amazing how much we're learning about property law. It's so much more complicated than I thought.
It really is. And each case is different, so getting expert help is really important.
Okay, so let's say I've got all the documents, I've talked to the municipality, and I've sent a conveyancer. What could happen? What legal options do I have?
Well, there are a few possibilities depending on your dad's situation. One option is applying for regularization of tenure.
Regularization of tenure? What's that?
It's basically where the government officially says you have the right to the property, even if you don't have those title deeds.
So it's like a legal catch-up for those who are left out of formal ownership in the past.
Exactly. It's a way to fix those injustices and give security to people who have been living on and taking care of land for a long time.
That sounds promising. But are there any rules or requirements for this regularization of tenure?
Yes, there are. You'll need to show that you've lived there continuously for a certain amount of time, that you've been paying your rates and taxes, and that you're using the property as a home.
Seems like a lot of evidence to gather.
It is. But it's all part of making your case strong. A good conveyancer can guide you through this process and make sure you have everything you need.
So that's one option. Any other legal avenues?
We could also look at prescriptive acquisition. We touched on it earlier.
Right. The idea that if you live somewhere for a long time, you can become the owner, even without the title deeds.
Exactly. It recognizes that if someone has been living on and taking care of a property for a long time, usually about 30 years, They have a rightful claim to it.
So if my dad lived in the house for decades, that could help my case.
It could, but there are specific legal requirements for prescriptive acquisition. It could be a tricky process to prove.
This is where having a good lawyer is really important.
Definitely. A conveyancer who knows property law can look at your situation, figure out if prescriptive acquisition is possible, and guide you through all the legal stuff.
Okay, so we've got regularization of tenure and prescriptive acquisition as options. Any others?
There might be. It all depends on the details of your dad's house and that municipal housing scheme. That's why getting all the information and talking to experts is so important.
It's like a puzzle. Each piece of information gets us closer to the full picture, but it's not just a legal puzzle. This is about people's lives, their homes, and their legacies.
I agree. Inheriting property is personal and often connected to emotions and family history.
Yes. And I think remembering those emotions is important as we go through this legal process. It's not just about winning, it's about remembering my father and securing my family's future.
You said it perfectly. And even though the legal stuff can be confusing, you're not alone. There are resources and experts to help you, and organizations like the Black Sash that offer free legal advice and support.
That's great to know. It makes it feel less overwhelming.
And don't forget about support from your community. Talk to friends, family, or neighbors who might have gone through the same thing. Sharing what you know and your stories can be empowering.
This deep dive is showing how important community and shared experiences are, especially with these complicated legal issues.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're all connected and can learn from each other. This helps us face these challenges with strength.
I want to hear more about those alternative solutions you mentioned earlier. Could there be new ways to fix these challenges with informal land ownership and inheritance?
Absolutely. That's what we'll talk about in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore some really interesting ideas and potential solutions that could change property ownership in South Africa.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring the world of property inheritance in South Africa, and you've been so patient with us as we've uncovered all these legal twists and turns. But before we wrap up, I'm really excited to talk about those alternative solutions you mentioned. You know, those innovative ideas that could change how we think about property ownership, especially when it's not clear who legally owns a property.
Yeah, it's time to get creative. We've talked about the challenges, the history, and the laws. Now let's think about a future where owning property is more inclusive and accessible.
I'm ready. What kind of out-of-the-box solutions are we talking about? Give me some examples.
Well, one exciting idea is community land trusts. It's like shared ownership, where a nonprofit organization holds the land for the community. Residents have secure rights to live there, and they get a say in how the land is used.
So it's like collective ownership.
Yeah,
And the community has a voice and benefits from the land.
exactly. It can prevent people from being displaced, keep housing affordable, and give power to communities to shape their own future.
That's amazing. It sounds like a much fairer and more sustainable way to think about property ownership. What other innovative solutions are there?
Another interesting idea is using blockchain technology. I know it sounds futuristic, but stick with me. Blockchain can create safe and transparent digital records of who owns land, especially where traditional documents are missing.
So it's like a digital record that keeps track of ownership, prevents fraud, and streamlines the process.
Precisely. It could be a game changer for places where informal land ownership is common. It could help people make their ownership official and access things like loans that they might not be able to get otherwise.
Wow. Technology can really change so much, even property ownership. These are some really exciting ideas.
And it's not just about technology. We can also look at changing policies, like making the process for regularization of tenure simpler, more affordable, and easier for people to access.
So less bureaucracy and making it easier for people to secure their property rights.
Exactly. We need to get rid of those obstacles and create a system that works for everyone.
This has been a really amazing journey. We've gone from the details of the deeds office to futuristic blockchain solutions. It's been an eye-opening look at property inheritance in South Africa, and I feel like I've learned so much.
I'm happy to hear that. And remember, you're not just inheriting a house. You're inheriting a legacy, a story, a connection to your father and your family's past. Embrace that story, cherish the memories, and let them be your guide.
Thank you. That's a really nice way to put it. It reminds me that property isn't just about legal papers, it's about family, community, and belonging.
And remember, even though this legal stuff can be difficult, you're not alone. There are experts, organizations, and people in your community who are here to help. Use those resources, ask questions, and don't be afraid to get advice.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and insights with us. This deep dive has been so helpful, and I think it's given our listener everything they need to feel confident moving forward. As we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with one final thought. Owning property is more than just a legal thing. It's a basic human right, a source of security, and a way to build a better future. Let's keep exploring new solutions and advocating for policies that make this right a reality for all South Africans. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. We hope you enjoyed this look at property inheritance in South Africa. Remember, knowledge is power. And we're here to help you navigate the complexities of life one deep dive at a time.